This morning, I called Bob and Jannie Bergdahl and told them that after nearly 5 years in captivity, their son Bo is coming home. I'm also grateful for the tireless work of our diplomats and for the cooperation of the government of Qatar in helping to secure Bo's release. We've worked for several years to achieve this goal, and earlier this week I was able to personally thank the Emir of Qatar for his leadership in helping us get it done. As part of this effort, the United States is transferring 5 detainees from the prison in Guantanamo Bay to Qatar.
This gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world.
And he said unto me, you must prophesy again.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Trumpet Daily. Over the weekend, the Obama administration brokered a very lopsided and illegal deal, exchanging 5 detainees at Guantanamo prison camp for one of our prisoners of war over in Afghanistan, Sergeant Bergdahl. You've probably seen quite a lot in the news about it just in the last day or two, and a lot of the commentary on it has compared it with some of the swaps that have been made in Israel, where you've read about these huge disparities of 1,000 Palestinian prisoners exchanged for one in the case of Gilad Shalit back in 2011. But really, in many ways, this deal is even worse, because what the Taliban received in return weren't just low-level individuals or terrorists that pulled triggers. These are 5 of their top leaders that the United States just handed over. And yet, you look at the way American officials are treating this, it's as if this is a huge victory for America. President Obama yesterday had the parents of that prisoner there at the White House, and he was applauding this victory as he sees it. You had the Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel, who flew over to Afghanistan to commemorate the occasion. And then, of course, you had all the White House representatives like Susan Rice and others on the Sunday talk shows yesterday talking about how this was a great day for America, a great day for the United States. That was yesterday. And then now today, what are we reading? We're seeing, aren't we, that there's a lot more to this story. As we read about this, just the shady details of how this individual became a prisoner. We're reading about the 5 detainees that were given to get him back, and how that these were, as I say, high-level Taliban officials. Let me just show you a few of the headlines from today. This is from the New York Post. The high cost of Obama's reckless Taliban swap. That's from John Bolton. We'll have a quote from that a little bit later. Another one, Obama's illegal prisoner swap, from the National Review online by John Fund. We'll look at that as well a little bit later. This from commentary, only 5 for 1. The Bergdahl swap is actually worse than Israeli prisoner deals. That's according to Jonathan Tobin. It's worse than some of those lopsided Israeli swaps, as I mentioned. This last one here, the trouble with Qatar, and then underneath there you can see Taliban hails, quote, great victory. That's the way the world of the terrorists see this. They see it as a great victory for the Taliban. They see it as a great victory for the terrorist cause. Here's a quote from the Weekly Standard. Mullah Omar, the head of the Taliban, doesn't make statements often. Omar is so reclusive that some have even speculated that he's either dead or otherwise incapacitated in Pakistan. But on Sunday, the Taliban released a statement attributed to Omar, who declared the release of the top 5 Taliban commanders from Guantanamo a great victory for the Mujahideen of Afghanistan. 5 Taliban commanders, they're declaring this as a great victory. These are hardened terrorists that have a lot of blood on their hands. They've killed a lot of Afghanis. They've killed a lot of Americans. Some have said thousands have been killed by the orders of these 5 individuals. That's a lot of blood. There was one headline today calling them the Taliban Dream Team, these 5. Quoting from Congressman Mike Rogers. He says, I believe this decision will threaten the lives of American soldiers for years to come. As I said, it was only just today, really, where we started to see a little bit more to this story than what was announced on Saturday. As the details come out, you're beginning to see, okay, what are the long-term implications of this so-called deal? And is it really good for America? Of course, anyone who's an American can sympathize with parents or relatives or family or friends suffering over the loss of a loved one or one that's been a prisoner for many years. But why are there so few in the administration that are unwilling to, that just simply won't look at the bigger picture or the bigger implications of this? So few will even consider that, as all of them, it seems, as I said, are treating this as a tremendous victory. This is from another, I guess, a congressman and also a senator, a joint statement released yesterday. It says, trading 5 senior Taliban leaders from detention in Guantanamo Bay for Bergdahl's release may have consequences for the rest of our forces and all Americans, not just our forces, Americans too. It says our terrorist adversaries now have a strong incentive to capture Americans. It says that incentive will put our forces in Afghanistan and around the world at even greater risk. What is the message that the United States is sending? Well, the message that is going out loud and clear, never mind what we say, the translation for the Taliban and other terrorist organizations is that terrorism is definitely more effective than negotiation. Now you could say, well, there were negotiations here for this prisoner swap. But the message coming through loud and clear is that if we, from the terrorist perspective, is that if we keep attacking, if we keep killing innocents, then it will get us what we want in the end. Look at the incentive it gives these top officials who know that they're carrying out, going around in hiding with a target on their head, but that if they do get caught, they have a pretty good chance of receiving a get-out-of-jail-free card because of these kinds of arrangements. The message going out is that kidnapping Americans will pay off big time. How would you feel now if you're a member of the military in Afghanistan? They're going to be awfully careful to make sure that they're not kidnapped. What will this do for the recruits? Terrorists going out trying to get recruits. Again, this is represented over there as a great victory, a great victory. Qatar was involved in the negotiations, as I mentioned, and as part of this deal, they agreed to take the 5 detainees to that little nation and to restrict their travel for a year. That's pretty much it, a 1-year travel ban. And then after that, what happens? Do you suppose those 5 will return to the battlefield? As it happens, that year, once it's fulfilled, will pretty much coincide with America's full-scale withdrawal from Afghanistan. All of these events happening together, America's drawdown, America's withdrawal, the release of terrorists from Guantanamo. If you look at the background of this prisoner of war, particularly if you examine the press in Britain, I noticed later today that there were more reports looking into whether or not this individual was actually a prisoner or if he deserted the American army. So there's some big questions that need to be answered, and there's quite a few, even from his own unit, who say that he deserted the U.S. forces, and they're very upset by it. They're upset by what's happened. 6 soldiers died trying to save, at least 6 died trying to save this prisoner. There's been a lot of blood sacrificed for him. And these reports have suggested he's made statements that show he's ashamed of being an American, that he can sympathize with the terrorist cause. Let me just show you a tweet. This was tweeted by his father on Sunday. And the name there at the start of the tweet is a spokesperson for the Taliban. And this is the tweet from the father of America's prisoner. He said, "I'm still working to free all Guantanamo prisoners. God will repay for the death of every Afghan child." And then that tweet was deleted just a short while after it was posted. Disturbing, indeed. Disturbing to see this. Now, we don't know all the details, as I say, but there are a lot of questions that remain. And meanwhile, you have other prisoners around the world, like a Christian pastor, an American pastor in Iran, who's languishing somewhere in a prison there. You've probably heard a little bit about the Marine that took a wrong turn down at the Mexican border, and he's been in jail for 2 months because he had a firearm in his truck that was registered, it was lawful and so on, but he took a wrong turn, and no one from the administration has even called the Mexican authorities to ask for them to release this Marine in good standing. What a world we're living in. So many things that you would expect the United States to be doing, it's not. And then so many things you would expect them not to be doing. That's what we see happening. This is from the New York Times. Just the other day. It says, among other complications, there was a potential legal obstacle. This is talking about how the deal went down between the United States and the Taliban. It says, Congress has imposed statutory restrictions on the transfer of detainees from Guantanamo Bay. The statutes say the Secretary of Defense must determine that a transfer is in the interest of national security, that steps have been taken to substantially mitigate a future threat by a released detainee, and that the Secretary notify Congress 30 days before any transfer of his determination. And what happened, of course, as you might have read, is that the President's administration just decided to bypass Congress. Evidently, negotiations have been going on for months and months and months. I mean, he's been a prisoner for 5 years, but all of a sudden it had to be done immediately. And Congress was bypassed. Let me just take you through the bill that was passed just last year. It's a little bit technical here, but just to familiarize you with the law as stated by a bill passed through Congress, and then more recently what happened, or how the White House went around that. This is from the House of Representatives law, Bill 3304. From Section 1035, it says, it authorizes the Secretary to transfer or release any individual detained at Guantanamo to such individual's country of origin or another country if, and then number one, you can see it says, the Secretary determines that the individual is no longer a threat to national security. That's one of the requirements. Or two, such a transfer or release is to effectuate an order by an appropriate U.S. court or tribunal. Requires as further determinations prior to such transfer that, number one, actions have been planned or taken that will substantially mitigate the risk of such individual engaging or re-engaging in any terrorist or hostile activity that threatens the United States. And two, the transfer is in the U.S. national security interest. Finally, it says here that it requires the Secretary at least 30 days prior to such a transfer to notify the Defense, Appropriations, and Intelligence Committee. So that's the section that the New York Times was paraphrasing there. And that was the bill that passed through Congress in December and that the President Obama, signed into law there at the end of December. But when he signed it into law, he also released this statement in response to the bill, which said, for the past several years, the Congress has enacted unwarranted and burdensome restrictions that have impeded my ability to transfer detainees from Guantanamo. This is from President Obama. And he says, earlier this year, I again called upon the Congress to lift these restrictions. And in this bill, speaking of the one that we just quoted from, in this bill, the Congress has taken a positive step in that direction. Section 1035 does not, however, eliminate all of the unwarranted limitations on foreign transfers. and in certain circumstances would violate constitutional separation of powers and principles. That's in his view. And then he says the executive branch, notice this, the executive branch must have the flexibility, among other things, to act swiftly in conducting negotiations with foreign countries regarding the circumstances of detainee transfers. In other words, if Congress doesn't act, then the president will. That's the message that we've been hearing coming out of the White House now for the past 12 to 18 months. If Congress doesn't act, then I will. And what we saw over the weekend was the White House acting, even going right around Congress. Very disturbing indeed. That's what John Fund said at the National Review. Notice he says the Obama administration's consistently cavalier attitude toward the rule of law, whether regarding the IRS scandal, Fast and Furious, Obamacare, immigration, or the repeated refusal to answer congressional subpoenas, is profoundly disturbing. Profoundly disturbing indeed. This is just yet another angle to this story. It seems you could go right down the list of it, but really in some ways this is the most disturbing angle to the story. Some of the other details haven't been fully revealed yet. This, and then the fact that these 5 that were released are hardened criminals, killers, that want to kill more Americans, no doubt. Lots of disturbing news coming out of this. Back in 1995, Benjamin Netanyahu, he said regarding prisoner swaps or releases, he said prisoner releases only embolden terrorists by giving them the feeling that even if they are caught, their punishment will be brief. Even if they get caught, their punishment will be brief. That emboldens the terrorists. Mr. Netanyahu went on to say that these lopsided swaps only encourage the blackmail that they're supposed to diffuse. It has just the opposite effect when you look at it over the long term. In the short term, there may be some who do applaud it and who are relieved and who are grateful. Again, parents, family, and so on. But look at the bigger picture. It's amazing, really, those comments by President or Prime Minister Netanyahu from back in 1995. And then he was the one that actually approved of the deal for Shalit back in 2011. Over 1,000 Palestinian terrorists released from prison for one Israeli soldier. And of course, it wasn't like Israel was celebrating it as a great victory. It was a painful concession to make. That's the way it was portrayed a few years ago in Israel. That's the way you would have thought it would have been portrayed this past weekend. This is, not really familiar ground for America to negotiate with terrorists, to just bypass the government of Afghanistan in Kabul and just to go directly to the Taliban. How much confidence do you suppose that will give the government in Afghanistan? How much confidence does it give the Taliban as soon as the United States is gone in 2016? Who's going to run that country again after America's longest war comes to an end? As if our departure just ends a war with us having a victory. That's not the way the enemies think. They've waited and waited and waited. They've waited patiently. And they've kept fighting, they've kept killing, they've kept running and hiding. And in some cases now, those that waited it out in prison have been released so that they could go back out into the battlefield. I think President or Prime Minister Netanyahu's example there, compared to 1995 to 2011, it shows you how over time that we are worn down from war, from struggle, from the constant fight. You remember what one Israeli prime minister said many years ago, that he was just tired of fighting. And that's the way it is for many Americans, not just in Washington, really all across the country. Tired of the struggle, tired of the fight. And so we're willing to agree to the terms of surrender, basically. Let's look at Hosea 5 and verse 13. We've read this verse many times when talking about Israel's wound, Judah's wound over there in the Middle East, and how the peace process, the discussions, the negotiations, how it really has wounded little Israel. And what kind of wound will these latest negotiations between the United States and the Taliban produce? Hosea 5 and verse 13, it says, when Ephraim saw his sickness and Judah saw his wound, then went Ephraim to the Assyrian and sent to King Jareb, yet he could not heal you nor cure you of your wound. See, it just becomes a state of sickness, a cancer that keeps spreading and spreading and spreading, and soon it'll be too big for anyone to help out the United States. Where will it lead now that this historic deal has been made? There was a report in Ynet News just today about Shin Bet, the Israeli police service, that said that they've thwarted 11 kidnapping attempts that have been orchestrated from prisons where Palestinian terrorists are being kept, are being locked up. And those terrorists in those prisons know that their ticket out is for their soldiers on the battlefield to capture an Israeli citizen or an Israeli soldier. And so they've orchestrated all of these kidnapping attempts because they know that that's their get-out-of-jail-free card. How will this change things in the war against terror? That war doesn't just end because of a deadline. Certainly not. This is from the Weekly Standard. Just today, this is the Secretary of Defense, Hagel, has gone so far as to argue that the prisoner exchange may lead to a meaningful peace deal with the Taliban, which is wishful thinking, to put it mildly. There's no evidence that the Taliban's willing to change its course, especially with American forces being withdrawn from Afghanistan on a fixed schedule. They simply wanted their senior leaders freed. That's the truth. That's the truth. And yet one of America's top leaders is suggesting that maybe this swap might lead to a meaningful peace deal. Can you believe that? Maybe it'll lead to peace. A lopsided swap such as this. It's incredible. I think the Weekly Standard is much closer to the truth in this case. They want their top generals back because the battlefield's about to be cleared, and then they can resume the war, taking over Afghanistan and carrying on with their terrorist attacks. One final one, this is from that John Bolton article I mentioned earlier. He said, swapping Bergdahl for illegal enemy combatants, terrorists in common parlance, signaled unmistakably to Taliban and al-Qaeda that Obama is determined to withdraw from Afghanistan no matter what the cost to the United States or those in Afghanistan fighting to remain free. See, that's the strategy now. No matter the cost, whatever it takes to get out, to empty out Guantanamo, to pretend that there is no war, to pretend that there's peace, to pretend that there's a peace deal. I mean, if you can't see that the problems of this world go beyond man, and that man is unable to solve them, then you have to be blind. As we've said so many times here before, I mean, it's not, this church doesn't take positions politically on either side. Neither side's been able to solve the problems of this world. but it is important for you to at least understand your world and to see where it's headed. To see where this is all headed. We've talked about this booklet quite a lot last year. We need to be talking about it more, evidently, with all that's happening. America under attack. Why are things going so wrong for America? What is happening to the United States? Why are we projecting so much weakness? Or as I said a few weeks ago, why do we have so many leaders who really are leading like children? Well, you can see the spirit that's behind it. If you order this book, you can order it by calling the 800 number there on your screen, or by going to thetrumpet.com and securing your copy online. It's important that you study, not just these works that we offer for free, but that you get into the Bible, that you dig into God's Word, that you understand where this world is headed. God tells us, and God reveals the solution. Jesus Christ, the Gospels tell us, came into Galilee preaching the gospel, the good news of the soon coming kingdom of God. That is the answer. That is the solution. That is the ending. And what a positive ending it is. But before that, there's a lot that you need to understand. This booklet will help you to understand that. Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next time on the Trumpet Daily.